On their third wedding anniversary. I was carrying the cake I had baked myself, waiting for my husband, Nathaniel Hale. Instead, I received a call from the hospital. His first love had been in a car accident, her aorta ruptured, and she needed immediate surgery. On the other end, his assistant's voice was frantic. "Madam, Mr. Hill said only you can save her." In my last life, I went. Wearing a 13-pound lead apron, I stood in the operating room for 19 hours straight. In the end, Emma Lewis lived. I died of heart failure. My husband never even saw me one last time. He kept vigil at his Moonlight's bedside until dawn. This time, reborn on that very night when the phone rang again. I calmly pressed decline. The phone buzzed against the table just as the clock struck midnight. Emily Johnson glanced down. The caller ID showed Nathaniel Hale's assistant, Daniel Wilson. In her last life, this was the call that had dragged her into hell. She didn't answer. The phone kept ringing again and again like a death knell. The house was silent. Silent enough to hear the snow falling outside the window. The cake on the table still sat and touched its cream roses as delicate and unreal as a dream. Tonight was her third wedding anniversary with Nathaniel Hale and the anniversary of her own death. At last, the phone went quiet. A few seconds later, it switched to an even sharper tone. This time, Nathaniel Hale. Nomally stared at the name flashing on the screen. Her eyes were already lifeless. She didn't pick up. In her last life, she had Daniel Wilson's voice had quivered with panic. "Madam, Miss Emma was in a car accident and aortic dissection. She's at our hospital. It's critical. Mr. Hale says only you can save her." Emily Johnson had been the city's finest cardio for a surgeon. That operation really only she could perform. What had she said back then? Something like, "All right, I'll come right away." She had slipped off a silk gown she had prepared for their anniversary, pulled on her white coat, and stood under the heavy lead apron for 19 hours without food or water. Molloy's had survived. She had collapsed from acute heart failure on the cold floor of the O. As her soul drifted upward, she had seen Nathaniel Hale rush into Emma Lewis's VIP ward. He gripped that woman's hand, his eyes red, his voice trembling in a way Emily had never heard. He whispered, "Emma, don't be afraid. I'm here." Not once had he asked where his wife was. Now in this life, the phone finally went still. Molly knew they would be here soon. She rose, walked into the bedroom, and opened the safe. Inside was a document and a pen. The divorce agreement. She had prepared it long ago, but never had the courage to bring it out. On the final page, she signed her name, Molly Johnson. The pen stroke was steady without hesitation. Keys rattled at the door. Moments later, Nathaniel Hale stepped inside, bringing with him cold air and fury. "Neely Johnson, why didn't you answer the phone?" His hair was mussed. His tailored suits stained with blood that wasn't his. Stark, ridiculous. Emily didn't answer. She only placed the signed papers on the cabinet by the door. "Nathaniel Hale, let's get divorced." His pupils shrank. It was as if he'd heard the funniest joke in the world. He tugged at his tie, his voice dripping with mockery. "Divorce? Emily Johnson? What kind of game are you playing now?" For 3 years, she had been docile and yielding, treating him like her entire world. He was so used to her submission, he had forgotten even a rabbit will bite when cornered. Emily's face showed nothing. "I'm not joking. I don't want a cent of your money. The car in this apartment, you can keep them." A beat. Then she added, "Or leave them for Miss Emma." "You." His expression darkened instantly. The air itself seemed to chill. "Do you have any idea how critical Emma's condition is? No one else in the entire hospital can operate if you still want to be Mrs. Nathaniel Hale. You'll come with me right now." His tone was commanding, dismissive, as if everything she did was only for the privilege of keeping that title. Emily suddenly felt a wave of pity. Not for him, but for the version of herself who had once loved him so desperately she lost everything. She lifted her gaze, calm for the first time, and met his eyes. Nathaniel Hale, you're mistaken about one thing. I am a doctor, yes, but I am not a saint on call 24 hours a day. I have every right to refuse non-emergency procedures when I'm off duty. And besides, she gave a soft laugh, though her eyes stayed cold. I am a cardiothoracic surgeon, not your personal property. Nathaniel's breath caught. He had never seen this Emily before. Cold attached. A stranger. Her eyes no longer held affection or dependence, only an abyss he couldn't fathom. Millie Johnson. He took a step forward, seizing her wrist with bruising force, a bulging under his skin. What the hell do you want? The pain burned her wrist, but Emily didn't struggle. She only lowered her eyes to his hands so taut with rage. What I want, it's written clearly on that agreement. Sign it and I'll walk out of here forever. Out of your life. You're dreaming. Nathaniel Hale all but ground the words out between his teeth. He didn't even know why he was this furious. Was it her defiance or that cruel line forever out of your sight? Just then his phone rang. It was the hospital. He glanced at the screen, panic flashing in his eyes. Loosening his grip on Emily Johnson, he answered, his voice tight with suppressed rage. How is she? Whatever was said on the other, and made his expression arc. And by the second, when he hung up, he shot Emily one last look so tangled and complicated, it was like a net tightening around her. Fine. Very well, Emily Johnson. Remember this day? With that, he turned and stormed out. The door slammed shut, the heavy sound striking her chest like a hammer, closing the coffin on her past life and opening the door to this one. Nil exhaled slowly, releasing a breath she'd been holding for far too long. She didn't stay another second in that house. Dragging the suitcase she had packed long ago, she stepped into the swirling smell. She didn't look back. Her phone, now set to silent, lay quiet in her pocket. She knew Nathaniel Hale would come looking for her. But so what? This life she was living for herself. She checked into a hotel near the hospital. A long hot shower washed away her exhaustion and every trace of Nathaniel Hale. The next morning, she was woken by a call from her department head. Ryan Taylor's tone was polite, probing. Normally. Last night, Mr. Hale of the UNG group sent over a patient in critical condition. You see, Ryan, Emily, cut him off. I wasn't feeling well yesterday. I already took leave. There was silence on the other end for several seconds. All right, rest well then. The patient has been handed to Deputy Director. Good. She hung up, her heart utterly calm. Lou was her deputy. Less experienced, yes, but capable enough. The surgery would succeed. Molloy's wouldn't die, but she wouldn't recover perfectly either. And what did that have to do with Emily? She ate easily breakfast before returning to the hospital. The moment she stepped into her office, she sensed the strange tension in the air. Her colleague's eyes followed her, filled with curiosity and fear. She ignored it. Pulling on her white coat, taking up her charts, she became once more the decisive, formidable drive. Johnson. All day she moved seamlessly from the operating theater to the wards, one case after another. By evening, she finally took a moment to breathe in the lounge. Her assistant, Olivia Clark, came in carrying coffee, hesitating at the door. Director Johnson speak. That patient from yesterday, Miss Emma, the surgery was successful, but Olivia lowered her voice. They say the nerves near her vocal cords were damaged. She may never dance again. Mon's hand froze with the cup midair steady without a tremor. Nemo Lewis, the nation's brightest star in dance. The stage was her entire life. To never dance again would be worse than death. Nil's mind flickered back to her last life, her own body cold on the floor, while Nathaniel cradled Dima in his arms, whispering soft comfort. He had loved her so deeply, treasured her like porcelain. Now his treasure was broken. What expression would he wear? Her thoughts were cut short as the door slammed open. Nathaniel Hale stood there, eyes bloodshot, fury radiating from him like a storm. He stopped toward her, every step like a predator closing in. "Emily Johnson, are you satisfied now?" The air in the lounge turned to ice. Olivia Pauld slipped out silently and shut the door behind her. Emily calmly set down her pup and rose to her feet. She was a head shorter than him, but her steady gaze met his without flinching, her presence every bit his equal. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't know." His laugh was cold, laced with venom. Miss' vocal nerves were damaged. "Shall never dance again. Don't tell me you don't know Deputy Lee's skill level. You set her up." The hatred in his eyes was so raw, it looked ready to devour her whole. As if she were the vilest sinner alive. Molly almost laughed. "Mr. Hale, first of all, I already called in sick yesterday. I wasn't the one who operated. Second, every surgery carries risk that's spelled out clearly on the consent form. And finally," she tilted her head slightly, genuine confusion glinting in her eyes. "Why does whether she can ants have anything to do with me?" Her indifference drove him over the edge. He seized her shoulders, shaking her hard. "Do you even have a heart? She was your patient." "I have many patients, Mr. Hale. I am not obligated to invest personal feelings into every single one." Her words were quiet, but cut like a scalpel slicing through his righteous facade. "Just like you only had one wife, yet you poured all of your feelings into someone else." Nathaniel froze. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. I signed the divorce papers. I am no longer your wife." Mealy wrenched free of his grip, stepping back to a safe distance. She smoothed out the wrinkles he had left on her white coat. Her movements unhurried, dignified. "Nathaniel Hale, keep your pathetic accusations to yourself. If you ache for her, that's your business. Don't shove your emotions onto me." "You weren't like this before," he rasped, his voice touched with a confusion even he didn't recognize. The Emily Johnson he remembered had been gentle, accommodating. Even when he strayed too close to Emma, she had simply endured in silence, never asking a word. When had she become like this? Sharp, cold, unyielding as stone. "People change," Emily said evenly. "Especially when they finally realized the thing they clung to for 3 years was nothing but a joke." With that, she brushed past him and walked out. Her wrist was grabbed again. This time his grip was gentle, almost imperceptibly pleading. "Emily Johnson, stop this. Come home with me." Emily halted but didn't turn. "Home," she repeated as if tasting some bitter medicine. "Nathaniel Hale, that was never my home. That was just a gilded cage in which you trapped a bird. Now this bird refuses to sing." In the end, Nathaniel Hale was escorted out by hospital security. The incident became the biggest gossip in the hospital. No one had expected the usually gentle drive. Emily Johnson to have such a hard edge to openly humiliate the president of UNG Group in front of everyone. Emily Johnson didn't care. She submitted her resignation. Ryan Taylor tried repeatedly to persuade her to stay, even promising higher positions and better benefits. She refused them all. The city carried too many painful memories for her. She wanted to leave to start over somewhere no one knew her. On the day she completed the resignation process, the sky was unusually clear. Emily Johnson stood at the hospital entrance, dragging her suitcase. The sunlight fell on her, warm and comforting. She bought a ticket to the south, a place where the weather was perpetually spring, perfect for new beginnings. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Hale's world plunged into chaos. After waking up, Muiz learned she would never dance again. She broke down completely, crying day and night, throwing things, spiraling into hysteria. Nathaniel hired the best therapists and psychologists, but to little effect. Every day after work, he rushed to the hospital to console her, utterly drained. Returning to his empty villa, no one left a light on. No one prepared a hot meal. The clothes in the walk-in closet once belonging to Emily Johnson vanished overnight as if she had never existed. Only the faint trace of her unique scent, a blend of disinfectant and something subtly floral, remained in the air. For the first time, he felt emptiness. Adala lake, as if a piece of his heart had been hollowed out. He began losing sleep the moment he closed his eyes. Her image filled his mind, in her white coat focused on work, her apron dyed bustling. In the kitchen, curled on the sofa quietly reading, and finally her dad gazed as she handed him the divorce papers. Frustrated, he sat up and called Daniel Wilson. Find out where Emily Johnson is. Half an hour later. Daniel returned, hesitating. Mr. Hale, madam, she took a flight early this morning and has left the city. Nathaniel's hand clenched around the phone. Where did she go? I don't know. She left no information. Silence stretched long enough for Daniel to hear his boss's heavy, restrained breathing. Finally, Nathaniel spoke almost in a whisper. She just left. A small southern town, gentle and serene. Emily Johnson rented an old house with a yard, filling it with flowers and plants. She took off her white coat and put on a cotton linen restfully, leaving the past behind. She found work at a local community hospital as a regular physician. Easy shifts, no nights, no high-pressure surgeries. She treated minor illnesses for neighbors, measured blood pressure, living a peaceful, quiet life. She learned to cook, to paint, to turn everyday life into poetry. Her smile grew brighter day by day. It seemed she had truly removed Nathaniel Hale from her life. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Hale's world didn't stop with her departure. He remained a high and mighty president of UNG Group. After a period of despair, Emma Lewis gradually came to terms with her reality. Unable to dance, she shifted to behind-the-scenes work, opening a dance studio, which Nathaniel supported handsomely. The media often showed them attending events together, a perfect match of talent and beauty. Everyone said Emma had finally married into the Hale family. Emily occasionally saw these news stories on her phone. She glanced once, then swiped away. No stirrings in her heart. One day, Emily was listening to a patient when an unexpected visitor appeared in the clinic doorway. Daniel Wilson. He looked worn, his suit slightly rumpled. Miss Emily, he corrected himself. Emily put down her stethoscope and asked the patient to wait. She walked to the door, her voice distant. You're looking for me? What is it? Daniel's expression was complicated. He pulled a document from his briefcase. Mr. Hale, he doesn't agree to the divorce. This is a court summons. He said, if you don't go back, we'll see each other in court. Emily took the summons without a glance. All right, I understand. Daniel froze. He had expected anger, questions, perhaps hysteria, any reaction a normal woman might show. But she didn't. She just stood there, sunlight filtering through the vines on the porch, casting dappled patterns over her. Time seemed to stand still, peaceful, untouched by the world. Daniel Wilson suddenly realized that perhaps Mr. Hale had been wrong all along. What he wanted to hold on to wasn't a wife. It was a soul, a pure and Amran soul that he had already lost forever. The court summons ended up as nothing more than paper. Nathaniel Hale never actually filed a lawsuit. Perhaps he was too busy. Or perhaps deep down he couldn't face the scene of a complete and final estrangement. Emily Johnson's life went on untouched until 6 months later she received a call from the Capitol. It was an invitation from the National Medical Research Institute. They had noticed a paper Emily had published on heart valve repair techniques and wanted her to join a new research project. It was the kind of opportunity every cardiothoracic surgeon dreamed. After a moment's hesitation, Emily accepted. In her bones, she still loved the profession that raced against death. MetLife was wonderful, but challenges reminded her she was truly alive. She packed her bags, bid farewell to the southern town, and flew to the Capitol. The work was demanding but fulfilling. She led her team, solving one technical challenge after another. A year later, the project achieved a breakthrough. The Institute hosted a charity gala, inviting elite figures from all sectors to raise funds for clinical trials. As Project Lou, Emily naturally had to attend. She swapped her usual white coat for a simple black gown. Her hair swept up to reveal a graceful swan-like neck. No makeup, yet she became the focus of the entire room. Her calm, confident aura shone brighter than any sparkling jewel. At the gala, the Institute's director introduced a promising young investor, Julian Rodas. A rising star in technology, polite and courteous, his gaze on Emily Johns and carried a mass admiration. "I've read your paper, Dr. Johnson. Your insights are impressive." "Julian Rodas, you flatter me," she replied, and they fell into easy conversation. All the while, one man watched from the shadows. Nathaniel Hale. He held a glass of wine, standing in the corner, his gaze sharp and poisonous, locked on Emily Johnson. He hadn't expected to see her here in this way. She had changed. Brighter, more unfamiliar. She laughed and conversed with another man, at ease and free in a way he had never seen. Nameless fire tinged with bitter jealousy consumed his chest. Almost uncontrollably, he stepped forward toward her. "Emily Johnson." A cold voice cut through her conversation with Julian Rodas. Emily turned. Nathaniel Hale's familiar face, now shadowed with brooding gloom, confronted her. Her smile faded instantly. Julianne sensed the shift and politely asked, "And this is?" Before Emily could answer, Nathaniel had already stepped closer, placing his hand possessively on the back of her chair. "I am her husband." The 3 words landed like a boulder on a still lake. The air around them froze. Julianne's eyes flickered with surprise, but he quickly regained composure and glanced at Emily, silently seeking guidance. Emily took a delicate sip of champagne, then looked at Nathaniel as if he were a quarrelsome stranger. "Nathaniel Hale, I think you're mistaken. We've had no relationship for over a year." Her voice was quiet, but everyone nearby heard. Nathaniel's face darkened to an iron hue. He hadn't expected her to offer him no courtesy in front of others. "Emily Johnson, do you have to be like this?" His voice lowered, carrying a warning. Emily seemed to ignore his undertone. She stood, offering Julian Rodas an apologetic smile. "Sorry, Julian. I'm feeling unwell. I'll take my leave." She picked up her clutch and turned to leave. "Don't walk away." Nathaniel Hale seized her wrist. His grip was fierce, as if trying to crush her bones. Emily winced, frowning. "Let go," she said coldly. "Come home with me. We'll talk. There's nothing to discuss." Their struggle drew the attention of more and more people. Julian stepped forward, lightly gripping Nathaniel's arm. "Sir, please release. Drive Johnson." His tone was calm, yet his eyes carried undeniable authority. Nathaniel finally tore his gaze from Emily and looked at the man for the first time. Their eyes locked, tension crackling in the air. Eventually, Nathaniel slowly let go. Emily's wrist bore a clear red mark. She didn't glance at it, walking straight out of the ballroom. The click of her heels on the marble floor echoed sharply, each step, striking at Nathaniel Hale's heart. He watched her resolute back retreating and for the first time felt the sting of panic. After the gala, Nathaniel Hale went into a frenzy. He canceled all engagements and locked himself in his office, endlessly reviewing all the files Daniel Wilson had gathered over the past year about Emily Johnson. She had gone to a small southern town working in a community hospital. She had learned to tend flowers and even kept a cat. She had moved to the capital and joined the National Medical Research Institute, leading her team to tremendous success. Her life no longer included him, yet it thrived vivid, brilliant, and full. At the end of the file were a few photos of her with Julian Rodas at the gala. A perfect match of talent and beauty, laughing and conversing effortlessly. Nathaniel Hale slammed the photos onto the desk, his chest heaving violently. He had always assumed that Emily Johnson would crumble after leaving him. He thought that one day she would regret it, return, and beg for him. But reality had dealt him a sharp, humiliating blow. Without him, she was better off. And every day he was trapped in the suffocating atmosphere of Emma Lewis's emotions, buried under the weight of company affairs, tormented by the emptiness of his villa. He even began to doubt whether saving Emma Lewis in the first place had been the right choice. Irritated, he lit a cigarette. As smoke curled around him, a memory struck. In their 3 years of marriage, Emily Johnson had never asked him for anything. She didn't love designer brands or jewelry. Her only passion was spending time in her study reading. He had never once stepped into her study. On an impulse, he drove to the villa he hadn't visited in ages. He used his fingerprint to unlock the door. Inside, everything remained exactly as it had been when Emily Johnson left, dust settling softly over the surfaces. He went straight upstairs and pushed open the door to her study. The room was simple, a wall of bookshelves and a desk. On the desk lay an open medical reference book, but Nathaniel's attention was drawn to a photo frame in the corner. A group photo, a young Emily Johnson smiling alongside a man in a white coat, gentle and scholarly. The man's profile bore a striking resemblance to Julian Rodas. Nathaniel's heart sank. He picked up the frame. On the back was a small inscription. To my beloved Emily Johnson mentor, James Miller. James Miller. The name struck Nathaniel like lightning, shattering his chaotic thoughts. A titan of cardiothoracic medicine in the country. He had been Emily Johnson's mentor. 3 years ago, he had been stripped of his medical license due to a medical accident and died in sorrow. And Julian Rodas, that was his son. Nathaniel immediately instructed Daniel Wilson to investigate James Miller's accident from 3 years ago. The results came quickly. It had been a meticulously orchestrated conspiracy. The patient's family had been bribed, crucial evidence tampered with, and the mastermind behind it all, none other than Emma Lewis's father, the hospital's vice director at the time. To advance his own interests, he had destroyed the life of a medical legend. During that period, Emily Johnson had pleaded tirelessly for her mentor's case to be reopened. She had stood outside his office all night, but Nathaniel, distracted by a single call from Emma Lewis, hadn't even let her in. He only remembered her pale face and reactant eyes. Thinking she was throwing a tantrum, he had impatiently said, "I don't have time for your nonsense." After James Miller passed away, Emily Johnson never spoke of it again. She simply became quieter. It wasn't silence. It was despair. Nathaniel held the investigation report, hands trembling. He had always assumed Emily Johnson's love was a given. He thought providing her a privileged life was the best he could offer. But he had never realized that at the moment she needed him most. He had dealt her the cruelest blow. And what had Emma Lewis been doing then? She had just won an international dance award for a single performance celebrating with Nathaniel in Paris for 3 days. The photos in his phone captured it all. Him grinning confidently, Mima's arm linked with his, her smile radiant. How ironic in retrospect. Bang! An expensive antique asterisk smashed to pieces on the floor. He grabbed his car keys and dashed out. He had to see her. He had to tell her he was wrong. He had been utterly mistaken. Mistaking fool's gold for a gem, discarding the true treasure. By the time he arrived at the institute, it was already late at night. Emily Johnson's office light was still on. He stood downstairs, staring at that small, warm glow, hesitating to go out. How should he even start? Say sorry. Too late. The words he owed her could never make up for what he had done. As he hesitated, a familiar car pulled up. Julianne R.H. stepped out carrying an insulated container. He walked into the building with ease and familiarity. A few minutes later, the office light went out. The two of them emerged together, walking side by side, speaking softly as they went under the street, their shadows stretched long, perfectly in harmony. Nathaniel Hale hid in the darkness, fists clenched, nails digging into his palms. A feeling he had never known. Desperation washed over him completely. Nathaniel Hill began to pursue Emily Johnson in the Clum Street most frantic way. He instructed Daniel Wilson to send her the largest bouquets of roses every day, each card filled with confessions and apologies. The roses always ended up in the trash. He bought the apartment opposite the institute and spent every day watching her arrive and leave like a voyeur. She never looked up. He leveraged his influence to become the institute's largest investor, appearing under the pretense of inspecting projects. She would only nod politely and address him as Mr. Hale. No extra glance, no extra words. He had been reduced to nothing in her eyes. The more frustrated he became, the more desperate he grew. Finally, he turned to Emma Lewis. At that moment, Emma Lewis sat in a wheelchair directing her students in the studio rehearsal. When she saw him, a familiar, gentle smile lit her face. "Nathaniel, you're here." Nathaniel Hale looked at her and for the first time felt that the face he had once been utterly obsessed with seemed utterly foreign. "You knew about your father from the start, didn't you?" he asked bluntly. Muiza's smile froze. I don't know what you're talking about." "Still pretending." Nathaniel's voice was as cold as ice. 3 years ago, Professor James Miller's medical accident. It was orchestrated by your father. Mio is spaled instantly. "No, Nathaniel, let me explain." "Enough." Nathaniel cut her off. "I don't want to hear another lie from you." He pulled a check from his pocket and placed it in front of her. "This money will ensure you never have to worry about food or shelter for the rest of your life. And after this, don't ever show your face to me again." Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving no trace of hesitation. Melia screamed hysterically behind him, but he didn't even look back. He thought that by resolving this, Emily Johnson would return. He was wrong. When he later brought a stack of documents proving James Miller's innocence to Emily Johnson, she merely glanced at them. "Thank you." And that was it. No further reaction. Nathaniel Hale's world began to crumble piece by piece. No matter what he did, he could no longer stir even the slightest triple in her heart. He was like a prisoner sentenced to life without parole, forever locked out of her heart. The final straw came unexpectedly. Nathaniel Hale's mother, who had always looked down on Emily Johnson, suddenly suffered an acute myocardial infection and was rushed to the hospital. Her condition was critical. She needed immediate coronary artery bypass surgery. In the entire capital, the only doctor capable of performing such a high-risk operation with the highest success rate was Emily Johnson. Nathaniel Hale stood outside the operating room, experiencing helplessness for the first time in his life. He dialed Emily Johnson's number. The phone rang for a long time before she answered. Her voice was as cold and detached as ever. "Hello, it's me." Nathaniel's voice was almost broken. "My mother," she quickly explained the situation. There was silence on the other end. Every second was torture for Nathaniel Hale. He almost expected her to refuse, just like she had refused to save Emma Lewis before. After what felt like an eternity, he finally heard her say, "Send me the medical records." In that moment, Nathaniel nearly broke down in tears. He knew she had softened. As a doctor, she could never stand by and watch someone die. Emily Johnson arrived at the hospital quickly. She changed into her surgical scrubs and before entering the operating room gave him a single glance. Calm and wavering. "The surgery is extremely risky. Be prepared," she said. And then she entered. The operating room light burned red for 10 hours straight. Nathaniel Hale stood outside for all 10 hours. For the first time, he understood the agony Emily Johnson had endured, standing in the operating room for 19 hours for his first love. He also felt for the first time the helplessness and fear a family member experiences while waiting to learn a loved one's fate. Time crawled by, second by second. Cold sweat coated his forehead, and his heart felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing it, making it almost impossible to breathe. He replayed the 3 years he had spent with Emily Johnson over and over in his mind. Only then did he realize how pitifully little he had given her in return and how immeasurably much she had given him. He was a fool, a complete irritate fool. Finally, the operating room light turned green. Molly Johnson emerged, fatigue lining her face, yet her eyes remained clear and bright. The surgery was successful. She said it and turned to leave. Nathaniel Hale stepped forward, blocking her path. The hallway lights cast a pale glare on his face, and the red veins in his eyes were clearly visible. Emily Johnson, he called her name, his voice thick with nasal tones and trembling. Emily Johnson paused and raised her eyes to meet his. "Thank you," he said. "No need. I'm a doctor. This is my duty," she replied, polite, yet distant. It was as if only the roles of doctor and patient's family remained between them. Nathaniel Hale's chest taped as if pierced by 1,000 needles. He stared at her, emotions churning in his eyes, regret, pain, pleading. Mainly Johnson, he finally managed to speak, voice strained. "Well, what would it take for you to forgive me?" The question he had long been afraid to ask was finally spoken aloud. He hoped and feared her answer. Emily Johnson looked at him in silence for a long moment, long enough that Nathaniel Hale thought she would never answer. Then she gently shook her head. "Nathaniel Hale, my forgiveness doesn't matter to you." Her words were like a soft blade, piercing the most vulnerable part of his heart. Doesn't matter. How could it not matter? Everything he was doing now was to earn her forgiveness. Important, he almost shouted, losing control. "To me, it's more important than my own life." For the first time, a flicker of emotion appeared in Emily Johnson's eyes. It wasn't moved, nor softened. It was a sorrowful pity, close to compassion. "Nathaniel Hale, you don't love me. You're just unwilling to let go. You can't bear to lose someone who once obeyed your every whim. You can't tolerate a variable in your orderly world. The only person you've ever truly loved is yourself." She dissected his deepest selfishness, word by word, exposing the rot in his soul. Nathaniel Hale swayed slightly. He opened his mouth, but no word of defense came out. Of course, he was just unwilling. He realized in that moment that he didn't even know how to love someone. After that conversation, Nathaniel Hale changed. He no longer frantically pursued Emily Johnson. Instead, he quietly devoted himself to her in a way that was almost reverent. He anonymously donated a large sum to the Research Institute to improve their equipment and staff benefits. He acquired all the properties of the vice president who had framed James Miller, leaving him destitute and paying for his crimes. He even began learning how to cart, attempting the few dishes Emily Johnson had once loved. Only he would never get the chance to serve them to her. The more he did, the more he understood how much she had given him in the past. The more he did, the clearer it became that he was drifting further from her. He had brought so much pain and suffering into her world. And now she had finally broken free, basking in her own sunlight. How could he drag her back into the shadows? Love isn't possession. It's letting go. It's granting freedom. It took him to lifetimes to understand this truth. One spring afternoon, Daniel Wilson brought Nathaniel Hale a document. It was an invitation. The world-renowned Mayo Clinic was inviting Emily Johnson to join as a visiting scholar for 2 years. "Hale, should we?" Daniel Wilson hesitated. He knew that with one word from Nathaniel Hale, the invitation could be rescinded in an instant. Nathaniel Hale stared at the invitation for a long time. Her name was printed clearly on the letterhead, elegant and beautiful. He could almost see the light in her eyes when she received it. A broader world entirely hers. He slowly closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his gaze was calm, clear. "No need. Let her go and wish her well for me." A bitterly cold winter morning at the capital's international airport. The sky was still dark, the air biting with chill. Molly Johnson walked alone, dragging a simple suitcase toward the international departures gate. She hadn't told anyone, not even Julian Rodas. They were good friends, close colleagues, but nothing more. In this life, she no longer wanted to be bound by any attachment. She just wanted to be herself again, the pure, independent Emily Johnson. The boarding announcement came over the speakers. Mae Johnson glanced back at the city she had lived in for 2 years, a city that had brought her both growth and unbearable pain. Then she turned without a trace of hesitation and walked into the boarding gate. She didn't answer. Nathaniel Hale, watching through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, saw the plane slowly taxi down the runway, lift into the clouds, and finally vanish into the gray-white horizon. He stood there for a long time until the blood in his body seemed to freeze. Daniel Wilson approached quietly. "Hale, the wind's picking up. Maybe we should go back." Nathaniel Hale didn't move. He only whispered, "Daniel, do you think people only learn to cherish something after they've lost it?" Daniel Wilson said nothing. It was a question he could not answer. Nathaniel Hale laughed suddenly. They laugh more painful than tears. "She's free and I am forever trapped in the past to lifetimes he had spent, and he had built for himself a prison from which there was no escape."